Do you believe that global warming is happening?
I do. I really believe it's happening because I was born here and I'm 34 years old, and I remember when I was a kid there was about 5 feet of snow for like a week or two at a time every year, and since about 11 or 12 years that's changed. This year we saw more snow, but I remember because as a kid you'd always get about a week of thick snow, and that was a normal thing, and it's warmed up. I mean, yeah, I mean, I've seen inconvenient truth as well, and I looked at that and it made a lot of sense to me because I used to be in Switzerland as well, and I've heard just around the world a lot of things have changed, and I know just from my own community and my own perspective here that it's definitely gotten a lot warmer. So I agree, and the whole thing makes sense. More cars, more pollution, it kind of reflects off the ozone and it comes back and heats the planet up. So that's my perspective, I guess.
What are some of the effects that we might see in our lifetimes from global warming?
I just have to guess. I mean, I'm hoping it's not going to be too severe, but my feeling, if it's warmed up so much in the last, 15 years or so, it could be huge. I don't know. I'd just be guessing, but I would say I'm hoping it won't be a severe change. But I don't know. I mean, especially considering the things over in India with the tidal waves and all that, could be a huge thing around the world. It seems like it's already happening. So here, I don't really know. Hopefully it doesn't get a lot drier. Then I think the forest and the trees will have more problems with the beetles, and we might lose a lot of the forest. That's my guess. So, sorry.
That's okay. What do you think that you as an individual can do to decrease global warming?
Well, I think mainly is think about your transportation and what you're putting into the environment and recycling. I used to live in Switzerland, and it was totally different there as far as recycling. Everyone's way more conscientious of what they're putting and what they're using and recycling into the system. Here, it's getting better, but I see a lot of businesses still not recycling. It doesn't make any sense to me, especially if you're a company and and your main thing is like maybe a restaurant and you're putting that in the environment. We got to all think about the long term. So recycling. Monitoring, maybe change diesel fuels, goes to, what are they doing now? Vegetable, they're doing, what is that? Ethanol, or they're doing different types of fuel. We don't need to be using oil. I think that we need to when we have solar, we can go that way, solar power, water power, just alternatives.
Thank you. What are some of the effects that we might see from global warming?
Well, it's the beginning of March, and we haven't had much winter weather this year, and I'm enjoying the weather and everything, but it's a little bit scary. I was just talking to somebody in there. It's, I don't know what to expect. I guess some people think it's going to bring on another ice age. The glaciers are going to melt, the oceans are going to rise, California's going to fall into the sea, whatever. I don't know if that stuff will happen or if it was going to happen anyway, but it's definitely, something to be concerned about and do all we can, I guess,
What do you think an individual can do to reduce global warming?
Drive less, buy less processed products, buy less petroleum-based products, less plastics, less disposables, reuse things, and just be smart about where you get things. Get stuff local that doesn't have to be trucked and shipped from halfway around the world, and be a part of a CSA, a community-supported agriculture, or get your food from a local farmer's market, and so it doesn't have to come as long of a distance to you. Those are the things that I do, I guess. So I don't know. There's tons of other things, small things that you can do too, just by turning your heat down a little bit, whatever. Use less electricity, anything.
What do you think some of the effects of global warming might be?
The greenhouse effect, which is like in different industries. I'm not real sure. I'm not real educated on the point.
Do you think that in your lifetime you'll see some of the negative effects of global warming?
Yeah, I kind of think we already have seen some.
Such as what?
Animal species,
like
extinction and stuff.
Do you think that there's anything that an individual person can do to decrease global warming?
I know there are, just not exactly sure right now what they are.
Cleaner cars. Yeah. Less pollution.
Recycling and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it's not really a belief. I mean, for me, you look at the climate record, CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, CO2 is going up and the climate is pretty well, I mean, the measurements of global temperature are going up, so yeah, global warming is happening. You know, belief is like believing in God. Okay. This is looking at data.
Do you think that we're going to see some of the effects of global warming in our lifetimes?
Well, some people say we're seeing them already, but you know, it's unclear what the effects are going to be, so it's hard to predict what they are. You've probably seen in the news that last year people were saying that the big hurricanes we all had were a result of global warming, and then we could expect maybe more this year, but then they didn't really happen. So it gets kind of difficult to predict the result of the climate change, but I'm sure we'll see something.
Do you have any idea what it might be?
Well, I think the easiest thing to predict is a rise in sea level, and that's, again, pretty well established.
Okay. And what do you think that anybody like us, an individual person, can do to decrease global warming?
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting. I live in Sacramento, and I rode my bicycle up here today for recreation. And although my wife did pick me up in a car to take me home, but, you know, I see a lot of people talking about doing things, but it's always somebody else has to do it. So, you know, when I see these big traffic jams on the freeway because nobody wants to carpool, or everybody and his brother going up to Tahoe and ski, I don't have a lot of confidence that anybody really wants to do anything about it until they're directly affected.
Thank you.
What you've been watching are candid interviews with people on the street in Grass Valley, California. As early as the 1800s, theories concerning climate change and global warming were suggested. However, it hasn't been until recently that we've understood the Earth's atmosphere well enough for scientists to accept that the Earth's climate is changing. Modern tools and technology have enabled scientists to collect enough data to supply convincing evidence to support this idea. Today, most climate scientists agree that some warming has occurred over the past century and will continue through this century. More information is needed to fully understand the phenomenon of climate change and to what extent human activities affect it. What we do know is that even small changes in temperature influence the functioning and distribution of life on our planet. In this segment of the program, we'll take a look at climate. What is it? What do we know about Earth's climate through time? And how do we know about climate before humans began to record information about it? Lianna, could you explain a little about climate and weather?
As the old saying goes, everyone talks about the weather. But what about climate? And what's the difference between weather and climate anyway? One easy way to remember the difference is that climate is what you expect and weather is what you get. Here in Nevada County, for instance, we expect January to be pretty cold and wet. Jackets, raincoats, and boots are kept by the door. Umbrellas are kept handy. And many people take precautions to keep their outdoor pipes and favorite plants from freezing on those occasional deep freeze nights. The climate, then, is what we expect. It's the average weather for a particular region and time period, usually taken over 30 years. These averages for our area give us the weather pattern that we expect from one season to the next and from year to year. The trick about averages and about our climate in Nevada County is that the averages are made from a widely varying set of readings over the weather over many years. For example, the average maximum daytime temperature on January 15th in Nevada City was 51 degrees over the 75 years ending in 2005. But on January 15th in 1942, the daytime high was 70 degrees. And back in 1950, the high for January 15th was a very chilly 8 degrees. That was the weather on those unusual days, and those temperature readings are included in the averages that help to define our climate. As we will see in our program, the farther we look back in time, the easier it is to see that the climate in our area has changed tremendously over long periods of time. The Earth's climate has changed many times during the planet's history, with events ranging from ice ages to long periods of warmth. Historically, natural factors such as volcanic eruptions, changes in the Earth's orbit, and the amount of energy released from the sun have affected the Earth's climate. So climate changes over time. We know this from a wealth of scientific studies that have analyzed everything from fossils and ocean sediments to a column of ice nearly 2 miles long that was extracted from an ice field in Antarctica. From these studies, we know about our climate past, going back over the millennia. But what about our climate future? It's now widely acknowledged that in addition to the natural phenomena that have caused Earth's climate to change in the past, human activities may also be contributing to climate change. What effect are we humans having on Earth's climate? When we look at our climate future as opposed to our climate past, what do we see? In this program and our NCTV series, Climate Changes, we will try to answer these questions and lots of other interesting and challenging points that they raise. Stay with us, it's going to be a wild ride.
It's spring, and a young man's fancy turns to, well, among other things, flowers. These are oak flowers. These are specifically the male oak flowers. They're going to put out the pollen when they get ripe. They're in long strings called catkins. Female flowers are a bit harder to find. They're in the axil of the leaf. Axil is a scientific term meaning armpit. It's not the flowers that I want to look at right now, though it's the leaves. You've got these little baby leaves coming out here in the springtime. And what I want to point out is the sharp teeth, spines on these oak leaves. Here we have one of last year's leaves. You can see those spines really well. Let's head over to Weiss Brothers Nursery now to check out some of their houseplants. And specifically, let's look at the edges of those houseplants. Let's see if we can find any with spines. Here we are with one of our most beautiful trees, red bark tree. It's the madrone. And when you zoom in on that leaf, look at the edge of that leaf. It's got teeth. This is the interior live oak. And look at those teeth. Now back to Weiss Brothers. Let's look at some more houseplants. And here we have another of Northern California's natives. I just might have a bit of Indian blood in me because I'm not very sensitive to poison oak. Look, it too has some teeth on its edge. Now I'm sitting next to toyon, or Christmas berry. This is the one that develops deep red berries late in the fall, and they last all through the winter. For some reason, the birds just leave them alone until they're desperate. Look at those teeth. And here we have yerba santa, healthy herb. Look at those teeth. So what's going on? A leaf is a food factory. It makes food for the plant. It uses energy from the sun, carbon dioxide from the air, water and nutrients sucked up by its roots. Suppose it's early spring in Northern California. There's plenty of sunlight to drive photosynthesis, plenty of carbon dioxide in the air, but the sap is not flowing. The plant is not getting any nutrients from its roots. That's because roots can't pump sap very far up the plant. Trees depend on their leaves to pull water and nutrients up from their roots. What drives the process is the evaporation of water off the surface of the leaves. But cold air can hold only a small amount of moisture, so only a small amount of water can evaporate from the leaves, and only a very small amount of nutrients get delivered from the roots. The plant can increase evaporation if it can get more air to move over its surface. That's what we do when we turn on a fan. What the leaf needs to do is to generate some turbulence. Look at how I can generate turbulence in a slow-moving stream of air just by sticking my finger into the flow. Plants never evolved fingers, but they have evolved teeth on the edges of their leaves. I've been in touch by email with Dana Royer of Wesleyan University, who's experimented with leaves and found that rough edges increase turbulence and thereby increase evaporation. Houseplants can only be grown indoors because they're native to the tropics, where it's always warm. Warm air evaporates water easily, so creating turbulence is not an issue for tropical plants. Farther north, we get a cold, if sunny, springtime, and plants need to do all they can to get the sap flowing. Looking at plants growing all over the world, botanists have found a close correlation between the average temperature in a region and the proportion of its plants that bear smooth or rough-edged leaves. The colder the air, the more plants have leaves with rough edges. Paleobotanists, studying leaves that fossilized millions of years ago, now use this relationship as a paleothermometer to determine a region's temperature millions of years ago when the fossilized leaves were alive. 40 million years ago, another mountain range stood where the Sierra stands now, and another river flowed where the Yuba now flows. That ancestral Yuba dropped the gold that the hydraulicers of the 1800s went after with their water cannons, turning the hills into diggins. And in those diggins, we find fossil leaves from the trees that grew on the banks of that river. Here's Dick Hilton, professor of geology at Sierra College, with a nice collection of fossil leaves from the ancestral Yuba.
The magnolias were broadleaf trees. Here's one from the college, and you can see that these match up pretty well. And they're both kind of shiny. And they're shiny because in the tropics you get a lot of rainfall, and you don't want to drown, so you shed the rain. And they'll even have these sharp tips on them, some of them very sharp, long tips, and these are called drip tips. And these are also to shed water. Also notice the nice smooth margins, which is typical of a lot of semi-tropical and tropical plants.
Tallying up how many of those fossil plants had leaves with rough edges and how many of those plants had leaves with smooth edges, scientists have determined that 40 million years ago, the climate of Northern California was subtropical. Which begs the question, why? Why did Northern California 40 million years ago have a climate like that of Mexico today? And why is it colder today? We'll talk about that in a future program.
What is the temperature going to be is a commonly asked question. How do we know what the air temperature is every day? Well, we use a thermometer like the one pictured now. Or we can turn on the radio and hear a weather report from the National Weather Service. They collect temperatures from weather stations all across the nation. This is a picture of the National Weather Station in Grass Valley, located at the sewer plant. Grass Valley has collected temperatures at this site since 1949, and we can plot data by week, month, and year from this station. A plot of Grass Valley temperatures for 2006 shows seasonal trends. This plot, pictured, is from 1949 when the Grass Valley station entered service. Note that the 1950s were much warmer than today. Handwritten temperature records from the Sierra Nevada go back 100 years. This plot is from 1903 to 2003. Note that the 1930s were warm. But how do we measure temperature over longer periods before there were thermometers and written records? One method used by scientists is to measure the width of tree rings. Tree rings grow faster when the weather is warm, which makes the tree rings wider. And when the weather is colder, the tree rings are narrower. Counting the tree ring core tells us how old the tree is, dead stump or building timbers, and we realize the age of these by counting the rings. The thickness of each ring indicates the temperature and precipitation. These are called proxy temperature indicators and can be used to construct river flows indicating warm and cold periods. The river is quite low now. Here's a graphic of the Sacramento River flow from 903 to 1903, 1,000 years. But it doesn't tell us much about temperature trends. We can use a 30-year moving average to tame the spikes and show trends. Here, a 60-year trend lines up to show the ups and downs will average out over 1,000 years. Even though our regional temperature has been stable for 1,000 years, the temperature over the planet has risen over the last 150 years, particularly in the last 15 years. So yes, the planet is getting warmer. There you have it. Daily temperatures collected over time and proxy records taken from trees can be used to show climate trends.
You know, something I find I really have to think about, be careful about when I'm thinking about climate and weather. How does this year's weather compare with last year's weather? I find, well, maybe I'm thinking, gee, we're really having a wet and cold spring this year. I find I'm really strongly influenced by today and yesterday and maybe the day before that. So I have to be really careful if I'm going to be talking intelligently about this year's weather and last year's weather. I have to write things down.
Well, I noticed that as someone who grows fruit trees, I'm always paying attention to when the fruit trees are blossoming, how it compares to the frosts, whether I'm going to lose the plums or lose the cherries or lose the apricots because they bloom early. And of course, with farmers, it's always chancy, one way or the other. You know, you can't really predict how the frosts are going to go, or how the winters are going to go, or how warm the springs are going to be. So it's something we have to pay attention to and try to figure out as we move along. What I have noticed, though, is that there is a movement now among the gardeners and farmers to change the zones. It's being discussed, how we're in a Zone 8 climate and what that's going to mean for planting crops. Are we actually going to change the zones so that we're beginning to plant a different type of crop? Are we going to plant fruit trees that are more easily grown in a warmer climate? So that's a discussion that's taking place nationwide.
We hope you'll join us for future programs of climate changes. We'll take a closer look at the underlying processes that determine weather and climate, and the science behind climate change. We'll also explore the impacts climate change may have on us globally, nationally, and here in Nevada County. Interviews with water managers, foresters, and land use planners who are preparing for possible impacts of climate change will tell us what actions agencies are taking.